March 18, 1945. Queen Victoria Hospital, East Grinstead, England. 3:47 p.m. The mirror lay face down on the bedside table. Hauptmann Hans Vogel had not asked for it. He would never ask for it. Through the gauze that wrapped his head like a mummy's shroud, he could smell himself, the sweet, sick odor of healing burns, tannic acid, and something else he could not name. Perhaps it was shame. Perhaps it was the death of everything he had been told to believe about perfection, about purity, about the destiny of those who wore the eagle and swastika. Outside his window, English rain fell on English soil. Somewhere in the distance, a gramophone played American jazz. The sound made him want to scream, but screaming required a face that worked, lips that could still form the shape of rage. His face now was meat and grafted skin, a construction site of British surgical ambition. A project. 3 months earlier, Vogel had been the face on recruitment posters. Literally. His photograph, blond, square-jawed, eyes the blue of alpine ice, had been reproduced 200,000 times across the Reich. Hauptmann Hans Vogel, 73 confirmed victories. The sword of the fatherland. Children collected trading cards with his image. Girls sent letters perfumed with lilac and longing. The propaganda ministry called him the living ideal. Then a British Spitfire pilot named McCreary, a Scottish farm boy who'd probably never seen the inside of a museum, put 4 303 rounds through his cockpit. Vogel's Messerschmitt Bf 109 became a meteor, trailing black smoke across the Kent countryside. He remembered the impact. He remembered fire. He remembered his hands going to his face and finding something that moved wrong, felt wrong, was wrong. Everything after that was morphine and terror. Now he lay in a hospital bed on enemy soil, and the enemy was trying to fix him. It made no sense. The Queen Victoria Hospital existed in defiance of everything Vogel had been taught about war. It was February 1945 when he first arrived, transferred from a regular POW hospital after British doctors realized the extent of his injuries. He expected a military facility, sterile and punitive. He expected guards with fixed bayonets and the casual cruelty of victors toward the vanquished. Instead, he found chaos organized into something resembling a carnival. Men walked the corridors in their own clothes, turtleneck sweaters, corduroy trousers, civilian shoes. They wore no rank insignia, no uniforms, nothing to distinguish Canadian from British from Australian. Many wore faces like his, reconstructed, scarred, works in progress. Some had no noses. Others had skin grafted from their thighs, stretched across their cheeks in shiny pink relief maps of trauma. One man, a Canadian bomber pilot named Edmonds, had lost his eyelids entirely. His eyes stared perpetually forward, terrible and unblinking, until you realized he was joking with the nurse about the weather. The hospital had been founded in 1917, but transformed entirely by one man, Archibald McIndoe, a New Zealand-born surgeon who'd trained at the Mayo Clinic before settling in Britain. By 1939, McIndoe had become the consulting plastic surgeon to the Royal Air Force. When the war began sending him burned pilots at a rate that made conventional treatment impossible, he invented a new model entirely. McIndoe's radical hypothesis was simple. A man's face was not merely flesh to be repaired. It was his connection to humanity, his interface with the world, the physical manifestation of his social self. Destroy a man's face, and you destroyed his ability to function in society. Repair it in isolation, and you created a medical success but a psychological catastrophe. The man would heal but remain forever broken. So McIndoe built something unprecedented, a therapeutic community. At Queen Victoria Hospital, patients governed their own wards through elected committees. They wore civilian clothes to maintain dignity. They were encouraged, practically commanded, to drink at local pubs, to attend town dances, to court local women, to live as normally as possible despite faces that often frightened children. The townspeople of East Grinstead, in an act of collective grace that would define the town's character for generations, welcomed them. Publicans served them beer without flinching. Shopkeepers addressed them as Sir and Mr., never patient or poor dear. A young woman named Kathleen worked at the counter of the local chemists and treated the burned pilots with the same cheerful efficiency she showed everyone else, never averting her eyes, never pitying. The pilots called themselves the Guinea Pig Club. It was dark humor, self-deprecating and defiant. They were experimental subjects, yes, but subjects who'd claimed agency over their own treatment. McIndoe encouraged it. He understood that recovery required not just new skin, but new identity, and identity required belonging. By March 1945, the Guinea Pig Club had 649 members. Most were British, but there were Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Free French, Poles who'd escaped to Britain after their country fell. They were Allied pilots who'd burned in Lancasters and Spitfires and flying fortresses. Young men who'd gone to war with smooth faces and come back with faces that looked, one pilot said, like chewed toffee. And now, inexplicably, impossibly, there was a German. Vogel refused to speak English. This was his first act of resistance. He spoke it fluently. The Luftwaffe had required language training for officers expected to operate across occupied territories, but he would not give his captors the satisfaction. When nurses addressed him, he stared at the ceiling. When doctors examined him, he endured silently, a body without a voice. It was performative defiance, and he knew it. But defiance was all he had left. His surgeon was a British major named Tillotson, a student of McIndoe's who performed the saline baths with clinical efficiency. Vogel was placed in a bath of warm saline solution for hours each day, his burns slowly softening, dead tissue preparing to separate from living. It was excruciating and monotonous. Pain stretched across time until it became a kind of background radiation. But the real surgery happened in stages. First, debridement, the removal of dead tissue. Then grafts taken from his thighs and carefully sutured to his face. Then waiting, hoping the grafts would take, that his body would not reject its own flesh relocated to a new geography. Then more grafts, more waiting. McIndoe's technique was revolutionary, the tubed pedicle graft. Instead of cutting skin free and hoping it survived transplantation, McIndoe would create tubes of skin on the patient's body, keeping blood supply intact, then gradually move these tubes to the face over weeks or months. It was slow, painstaking, but it worked. The survival rate was extraordinary. Vogel understood intellectually that he was receiving the best reconstructive surgery available anywhere in the world. The British were leaders in this field, their expertise purchased through tragedy. The RAF's bomber crews had been burning in unprecedented numbers since 1940. Necessity had mothered invention. But understanding did not equal acceptance. At night, when morphine thinned the membrane between consciousness and dream, Vogel saw faces. His mother, who'd wept with pride when he received his Knight's Cross. His younger brother, Franz, who'd worshipped him, who'd wanted nothing more than to follow Hans into the Luftwaffe. His commanding officer, Oberst Brandt, who'd told him, "You are what we fight for, Hans." Remember that, and he saw the Führer's face, which he'd only glimpsed once in person at a 1943 awards ceremony. Hitler had gripped his shoulder, looked into his eyes with an intensity that felt like burning, and said, "You embody the Reich." What would the Führer say now, seeing him like this? Disfigured, dependent, weak. The Reich had a word for people like him now. Lebensunwertes Leben. Life unworthy of life. He'd participated in that ideology, hadn't he? Not actively. He was a pilot, not a bureaucrat, but through silence, through acceptance, through not asking questions about where certain people disappeared to. The Reich valued strength, perfection, purity. It had built its entire aesthetic around classical ideals, marble statues, perfect proportions, bloodlines traced like mathematics. And now he was none of those things. April 12, 1945. Ward 3, Queen Victoria Hospital. Major Joseph Miller arrived at Queen Victoria Hospital on April 10, 1945, 2 days after Franklin Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia. Miller was U.S. Army Medical Corps, a plastic surgeon who'd trained under Dr. Vilray Blair at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis before the war. He was 34 years old, originally from Ohio, with the easy confidence of Americans who'd grown up believing impossible things were merely difficult. McIndoe had requested him specifically. The Americans had developed their own innovations in reconstructive surgery, particularly with tantalum mesh for bone reconstruction and new approaches to nerve grafts. McIndoe believed in cross-pollination and gathering the best minds from allied nations to create something greater than any single tradition could achieve. Miller was also useful for another reason. He was not British. His neutrality, such as it was, might bridge certain gaps. "Your German is interesting," Miller said to McIndoe during his first ward rounds. "Hauptmann Vogel," McIndoe replied. 73 confirmed victories. He was one of theirs best. Now he's one of our most challenging cases. Challenging medically or politically? Both. McIndoe paused outside Vogel's room. He's isolated himself completely. Won't speak English, won't interact with other patients, won't look at his face. Tillotson's doing excellent work on the reconstruction, but we're losing him psychologically. The other patients know he's German? Of course. This isn't a secret facility. But they've been remarkably restrained. No violence, no confrontation. They ignore him mostly. It's almost worse than hostility. Miller understood. Isolation was a kind of death. Let me talk to him, Miller said. He won't respond. Maybe not today. Miller entered Vogel's room without knocking. The German lay on his bed, bandages recently changed, staring at nothing. Miller pulled up a chair, sat down heavily, and began speaking in German. Hauptmann Vogel. I'm Major Joseph Miller, United States Army Medical Corps. I'm here to assist with your reconstructive surgery. No response. I trained under Dr. Blair and Saint. Louis. Before the war, I studied under Jacques Joseph in Berlin. Yes, a Jewish surgeon. I know the irony. Joseph taught me that faces are maps of human experience. Every line, every scar tells a story. Your face will tell a story too, but you get to decide which story. Vogel's eyes flickered. Just slightly. Here's what I know about you, Miller continued. You were a damn good pilot. 73 kills means you weren't just good, you were exceptional. You had reflexes, spatial awareness, the ability to track multiple threats while managing your aircraft. Those are rare gifts. He leaned forward. Here's what else I know. You're terrified. Not of pain. Any man who survives third-degree burns over 40% of his face has already negotiated with pain. You're terrified of looking, of seeing what you've become. You're terrified that everything they told you about perfection and strength was true, which means you're now excluded from it. Vogel's hands clenched on the sheets. But here's what they didn't tell you, Miller said softly. Perfection was always a lie. The strongest thing a human being can do is survive being broken and still choose to live. He stood. When you're ready to look, I'll be here. Until then, I'm going to keep rebuilding your face because that's what I do. Whether you choose to live in it afterward is up to you. Miller left. Behind him in the silence, Vogel felt something crack inside his chest, a shell he'd built around shame beginning to fracture. The breakthrough, when it came, was not grand. It was a British sergeant named Albert Hoskins, Al to everyone, who'd been a tail gunner on a Lancaster bomber. Al had been burned when his aircraft took flak over Berlin on November 23, 1943. The hydraulics caught fire and the rear turret became an oven. He'd survived by jettisoning the turret entirely, then spending 8 months as a guest of McIndoe's surgical theater. Now his face was a patchwork, functional but undeniably scarred, skin grafts visible as slight color variations across his cheeks and forehead. Al had a quality that transcended appearance, relentless, uncomplicated decency. On April 15, 1945, Al walked into Vogel's room uninvited, sat down, and said in slow, careful German, "You shot down some of my friends." Vogel looked at him for the first time. "Probably," Vogel said in English, his first word in the language since arriving. "Yeah," Al said. "That's war, isn't it? I dropped bombs on German cities. Probably killed some of your friends, their families, people who'd done nothing to me. That's war too." Silence. "Look," Al continued, "I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to forgive or forget or any of that. I'm here because Miller asked me to come talk to you, and Miller's a good man. He thinks you're drowning, and drowning men don't care about uniforms." "Why would you care if I drown?" "I don't, particularly," Al said honestly. "But I care what drowning does to the people trying to save you. McIndoe, Tillotson, Miller. They've put pieces of us back together. They've given us faces when we had none, hope when we had none. They believe in something I didn't understand at first, that healing isn't just medical, it's social. We heal because we're treated as men worth healing." He stood to leave. "You're the enemy." "That's true. But you're also someone whose face got burned off, same as mine. And if McIndoe thinks you're worth saving, then maybe there's something there worth looking at." After Al left, Vogel stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. Then, moving slowly, carefully, he reached for the mirror. April 20th, 1945. Adolf Hitler's 56th and final birthday. Vogel looked at his face for 17 minutes. It was both better and worse than he'd imagined. The swelling had reduced. The grafts had taken mostly. He could recognize elements of his former face in the reconstruction. The basic architecture was still his, but the details were wrong, foreign. His right cheek was slightly higher than his left. The skin around his reconstructed nose was shiny, too tight. His upper lip pulled slightly to one side. He was not hideous. McIndoe and his team had done extraordinary work. But he was not the face on the recruitment posters either. That face was gone forever, burned away at 400 miles per hour over Kent. He was looking at a stranger who was also himself. That night, Miller found him sitting in the ward's common room, the first time he'd left his bed voluntarily. The room was empty, except for one other patient, a Canadian pilot reading a month-old newspaper. "Progress," Miller said. "Am I?" Vogel asked. "You're here." "That's progress." Vogel gestured at the newspaper. "What's the news?" "Depends. Do you want the military news or the real news?" "Is there a difference?" "Always." Miller sat down. "Military news. The Soviets are in Berlin. The Americans have reached the Elbe. Your country has weeks left, maybe days. The real news. Roosevelt died and everyone's wondering if Truman is up to the job. The real news. Spring is coming. The grass is growing. And there's a batch of local beer at the Whitehall Tavern that's actually drinkable." Vogel processed this. Berlin falling. The Reich collapsing. Everything he'd fought for, bleeding out in the rubble of its own mythology. "I killed 73 Allied pilots," Vogel said quietly. "Yes." "How many people died when they crashed?" "I don't know." "Do you want me to calculate it?" "No." Vogel paused. "Yes." Miller considered. "Let's say average crew sizes. Spitfires and Hurricanes were single seat. Lancasters were 7. Halifax's 7. B-17's 10. Shall we split the difference and call it 4 per aircraft? That would be 292 men, give or take, plus however many civilians died when those aircraft crashed into buildings or fields or the channel." The number hung in the air between them. "I was good at my job," Vogel said. "You were excellent at your job. That's not the same as your job being good. You think I'm a murderer." "I think you're a pilot who fought in a war," Miller said. "Same as every other pilot in this hospital. Al dropped bombs on Berlin. Did that make him a murderer? Or was he just a working-class kid from Birmingham doing what his country asked of him? It's not the same. Isn't it? You fought for evil men. Yes. Your cause was monstrous, yes. But were you individually conscious of that evil while you were pulling triggers at 30,000 feet? Or were you doing what you'd been trained to do, what you'd been told was honorable, what all your friends and family celebrated?" Vogel had no answer. "The question isn't whether you were complicit," Miller continued. "You were. We all were, in various ways. The question is what you do now, whether you choose to remain a corpse of the Reich or become something else." April 29, 1945. The final surgery. McIndoe worked on Vogel's face for 4 hours, the final major reconstruction. It was delicate work, refining the nose, adjusting the eyelids, smoothing transitions between grafted and original skin. Miller assisted, his American techniques complementing McIndoe's British precision. When Vogel woke, his face was swollen again, but differently. The architecture was complete. Now it was just a matter of healing, of the swelling reducing, of his body accepting its new configuration. "How do I look?" he asked Miller through the fog of anesthesia. "Like someone who's been through hell and came out the other side." That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be true. 3 days later, the swelling had reduced enough for Vogel to see the final results. Miller and Al both came to his room. Al carried 2 pints of beer, condensation beating on the glass. "From the Whitehall," Al said. McIndoe's standing prescription. "Beer for recovery." Miller set a 3rd pint on Vogel's bedside table. "I don't drink," Vogel said reflexively. "You did yesterday," Al pointed out. "I saw you in the common room with Edmonds and that French pilot. What's his name? Laurent." "Right, Laurent. You were drinking." It was true. The previous evening, Vogel had accepted a beer from another patient, a moment of thoughtless camaraderie that surprised him as much as it surprised anyone else. "Today's different," Miller said. "Today we're drinking with intention." He handed Vogel the mirror. Look. Vogel looked. His face was still swollen, still red, still marked by the violence of reconstruction. But it was a face. A human face. Not perfect, not the propaganda poster, but recognizably human. The Germans shot me down over Berlin, Al said suddenly. November 43. I was in that rear turret, and I saw the tracer rounds coming up at us like Christmas lights. Beautiful, really? Stupid to think that, but I did. Then we got hit, and the hydraulics caught fire, and I was cooking. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. Burned alive at 22 over a city I've never walked in, killing people I've never met. He took a drink of his beer. But I didn't die. I got the turret jettisoned somehow. Parachuted down. Got caught immediately. Spent 8 months as a POW before they realized I needed surgery they couldn't provide. Eventually ended up here at McIndoe's. Why are you telling me this? Vogel asked. Because you need to understand something, Al said. Every man in this hospital, every single one, has a moment when death said hello. We all saw it. We all felt it. And we all survived, but we didn't survive unchanged. We survived as different men, with different faces, different fears, different understandings of what matters. Miller picked up his beer. In my tradition, there's a concept called l'chaim. To life, it's a toast, but it's more than that. It's an affirmation that despite everything, despite war, despite suffering, despite the cruelty humans inflict on each other, we choose life. We choose to keep going. He raised his glass. You shot down Allied pilots. Al dropped bombs on German cities. I've put men back together just so they could go back and kill again. None of us are innocent. None of us get to pretend we're not marked by what we've done. But we're here now, together, and that has to mean something. Al raised his glass. To surviving. Miller looked at Vogel, waiting. Vogel's hand trembled as he reached for his beer. The glass was cold, solid, real. He lifted it slowly, feeling the weight, the responsibility of the gesture. 3 men, 3 nations, 3 wars contained in 3 bodies. Little shame, Vogel said quietly. They drank. May 8, 1945. V-Day. The war in Europe ended while Vogel was eating breakfast. Someone turned on the BBC, and Churchill's voice filled the ward. We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, but let us not forget for a moment the toil and efforts that lie ahead. Around him patients cheered. Edmonds, the Canadian with no eyelids, wept openly. Laurent, the Free French pilot, shouted something in French that might have been prayer or profanity. Al simply nodded once, satisfied, and went back to his eggs. Vogel sat frozen. The Reich was over. Everything he'd fought for, everything he'd been told was eternal and inevitable and destined, had collapsed in just over 5 years. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12. Miller found him an hour later, standing by the window, looking at nothing. You all right? My brother, Vogel said. Franz. He was in Berlin. Volkssturm. They conscripted him last year, gave him a rifle and told him to defend the city. He was 16. You don't know? I know. Vogel's voice was flat. The Soviets went through Berlin like fire through paper. Franz is dead, or he wishes he was. Miller said nothing. There was nothing to say. I told him to be brave, Vogel continued. When he wrote me in 44, scared, asking what he should do, I told him to be brave, to serve the fatherland, to remember that we were the future. He turned from the window. I sent my brother to die for a lie. Yes, Miller said simply, because there was no comfort in denial, no healing in false hope. You did, and you'll carry that. But carrying it doesn't mean drowning in it. How? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I can fix faces, Vogel. I can't fix souls. But I know this. If Franz is dead, making yourself a memorial to your guilt won't bring him back. The only way forward is forward. June 1945. Integration. The transformation was gradual, unmarked by any single moment. Vogel began attending the common room regularly. He played cards with Edmonds and lost spectacularly. He listened to Laurent's stories about flying for the Free French, stories told with dramatic gestures and creative profanity. He learned to drink British beer without making faces. Al became something like a friend, though neither man would have used that word. They had an understanding. They'd tried to kill each other by proxy, and now they were surviving together. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something real. The townspeople of East Grinstead welcomed him with the same matter-of-fact grace they showed all the guinea pigs. The woman at the chemist's, Kathleen, greeted him as Mr. Vogel and never flinched at his face. The publican at the Whitehall poured him beer and asked about his recovery with genuine interest. An elderly man named Pritchard, who'd lost a son over Hamburg, shook Vogel's hand one day and said simply, "You're here now." That's what matters. It was incomprehensible and healing in equal measure. In July, McIndoe gathered all the guinea pigs for one of his regular meetings. The club had grown to over 700 members. They sat in the hospital's main hall, men with rebuilt faces and rebuilt lives, and McIndoe addressed them with characteristic directness. "Gentlemen, you are not medical curiosities. You are not victims. You are men who've been through hell and have chosen to keep living. That choice, that daily decision to participate in life despite everything, is the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." He paused. "Some of you will always be marked by what happened. Some of you will face stares and questions and the small cruelties of people who don't understand. But you will face it together. You are the Guinea Pig Club, and membership is permanent." After the meeting, Vogel approached McIndoe. "Sir, I need to ask, why did you treat me?" "I was the enemy." McIndoe looked at him with those sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. "Because you were a patient who needed treatment. Because my oath says I heal, period. Because," he paused, considering, "because I spent the first war watching young men destroy each other for no good reason, and I decided if I survived, I'd spend my life putting people back together. All people. The war's over, Hauptmann. You're not the enemy anymore. You're just a man who needs healing. I don't deserve it. Deserve has nothing to do with it. You're here. You're alive. That's enough." August 1945. The photograph. The Guinea Pig Club took a photograph. It was a tradition, documenting the members, creating a visual record of survival. Over 700 men gathered outside the hospital, some with faces still bandaged, others with faces fully healed, all of them marked by what they'd endured. Vogel stood in the back row next to Al. When the photographer called for everyone to smile, Vogel tried. His reconstructed face managed something approximating a smile, the muscles still learning their new paths, the skin still tight across grafted tissue. The shutter clicked. The photograph survived the decades that followed. It hung in the hospital, a testament to McIndoe's vision and the resilience of the men he'd treated. If you looked closely in the back row, you could see a man who'd once been called the living ideal, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men he'd once fought against, all of them wearing faces that told stories of fire and reconstruction. Someone viewing the photograph decades later would never know which faces were British, which Canadian, which Australian, which German. The scars erased nationality. The survival transcended it. September 1945. Discharge. Vogel was cleared for release in September. His face was healed as much as it would ever be. The grafts had taken. The swelling was gone. He looked like a man who'd been through something terrible and survived it, which was accurate. The British government processed him through the POW repatriation system. Germany was divided, occupied, devastated. The country he'd fought for no longer existed in any meaningful sense. He would be sent back to what remained, to camps and rubble, and the long accounting of what had been done. The night before his transfer, Miller and Al came to his room with a bottle of actual scotch, liberated from McIndoe's private supply. "Contraband," Al said cheerfully. "Don't tell the Major." "I'm a major," Miller pointed out. "The British Major, McIndoe. Don't tell him." They drank in Vogel's room, three men who should never have been friends, but who'd found something resembling it anyway. "What will you do?" Miller asked. "I don't know," Vogel said honestly. "Go back to Germany. Find out if anyone I knew survived. He struggled for words. "Try to live with what I was." "What you were," Al said, "was a pilot in a war. What you are now is up to you." "Is it that simple?" "No," Miller said. "It's never that simple. But it's true anyway." They finished the bottle. Before leaving, Miller shook Vogel's hand, a firm grip, equal to equal. "If you ever make it to America, look me up. St. Louis, Barnes Hospital. I'll buy you a beer. If you ever make it to Birmingham," Al said, "do the same. The Pig and Whistle. I'll buy you a proper pint, not this southern swill they serve in East Grinstead." Vogel surprised himself by laughing. His reconstructed face handled it well. Vogel returned to a Germany that no longer resembled the country he'd left. Berlin was rubble. The Reich was ashes. His family home in Munich had been destroyed in the Allied bombing campaigns. Poetic justice, he supposed, considering how many British homes he'd helped destroy. Franz was dead, killed in the last days of fighting, 16 years old, shot by Soviet soldiers while manning a useless barricade with a rifle he barely knew how to use. His mother had survived, living with relatives in the countryside. She wept when she saw Vogel's face, though whether from grief or relief he couldn't tell. He never spoke about his time at Queen Victoria Hospital. The story was too strange, too contrary to everything people expected from wartime captivity. But he kept the photograph, a small print McIndoe's staff had given each member of the club. In it, he stood next to Al, two men with rebuilt faces standing in the English sun. Sometimes late at night, he would look at the photograph and remember the weight of a beer glass in his hand, the sound of English rain on English windows, and three men drinking together despite everything history said they should be. He'd been taught that perfection mattered, that strength was everything, that weakness deserved only contempt. But McIndoe and Miller and Al and all the others had taught him something else, that survival could be a kind of grace, that healing was possible even after the most profound breaking, and that humanity, messy, imperfect, scarred humanity, was stronger than any ideology. The war had destroyed his face. But maybe in a hospital in East Grinstead, it had saved his soul. He never forgot the taste of that first beer, shared between enemies who'd chosen to be men instead. L'chaim, to life. The Queen Victoria Hospital and the Guinea Pig Club were real. Sir Archibald McIndoe pioneered reconstructive surgery techniques that transformed treatment for burn victims. The club ultimately included 649 members, primarily British and Commonwealth pilots burned during World War II. The hospital's revolutionary approach, treating patients as a therapeutic community, encouraging integration with the local town of East Grinstead, and focusing on psychological recovery alongside physical healing, represented a paradigm shift in medical treatment. While Hauptmann Hans Vogel is a fictional character, German POWs did receive medical treatment in British facilities. The ethical complexities of treating enemy combatants, the psychological challenges of recovery from devastating injuries, and the social innovations of McIndoe's approach are all grounded in historical reality. The Guinea Pig Club still meets annually, now including family members and descendants. The photograph mentioned in the story exists in various forms. The club documented its members throughout the war and after. McIndoe's legacy continues through modern burn treatment protocols and the understanding that healing requires social and psychological support as much as surgical skill. East Grinstead earned the nickname the town that didn't stare, a testament to the extraordinary compassion of its residents toward the young men whose faces bore the scars of war.